Megan always felt safe in her home, her sanctuary. But tonight, something was different. The evening had started like any other, a long day behind her, and the comfort of her bed waiting ahead. She'd just settled in, the cool sheets wrapping her like a much-needed hug, when everything changed. A faint creak broke the silence. She sat up, her pulse quickening, eyes darting to the doorway. Standing there, dimly lit by the hallway glow, was Peter, her teenage nephew. "Peter," she called, her voice soft but curious. "What are you doing up?" Peter shifted awkwardly, glancing away before meeting her eyes. "I couldn't sleep, just getting some water." Megan frowned, brushing off the unease that stood in her chest. "It's late," she replied gently, her tone firm but caring. "You should be in bed." But Peter didn't budge. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward. Something about his movements made Megan's heart pick up pace. Instinctively, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Peter," she said again, this time with a cautious edge. "What's going on?" He hesitated, his words stumbling as he mumbled, "I thought I heard something. Did you forget to lock the door?" Megan's stomach tightened. The question struck a nerve. "No, I'm sure I locked it," she replied quickly, brushing off the creeping unease. "It's fine. Just go back to bed." But he didn't answer. He just kept moving closer, each step slow and unsettling. Megan's breathing grew shallow, her eyes flickering between him and the doorway. "Peter," her voice sharpened, a warning now. "What are you doing?" He stopped at the edge of the bed, his gaze steady, unnervingly intense. His eyes lingered on her a moment too long, and she shifted under the weight of it. Then it happened. His gaze dropped, unmistakably, to her legs. A cold shiver ran down her spine. The realization hit her like a punch. He had seen her, her bare skin, her exposed thighs. He had noticed, and now he was just standing there. Megan's heart pounded as her mind raced. She inhaled sharply, her voice breaking through the tension like a whip. "Peter," she snapped, her tone rising with urgency. Disbelief washed over Megan like a cold wave. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. Peter's face turned crimson, his eyes darting away. "I didn't mean to." "Get out." Megan cut him off, her tone firm, her finger pointing toward the door. "Now, go to your room." For a moment, Peter just stood there frozen. Then his face went pale, and without a word, he turned and bolted down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Megan remained on the edge of her bed, trembling. What just happened? Her breath came in shallow bursts as she tried to piece it all together. The room felt suffocatingly still, the silence pressing in around her. She glanced toward the open doorway, half expecting Peter to reappear, but the house was still, too still. Her mind replayed the moment again and again, his gaze, the awkward tension, the unease that lingered long after he'd left. Something had shifted. Something was different now. And it scared her. She rubbed her temples, trying to force her thoughts into some semblance of order. But just as she began to steady herself, a knock on the door shattered the silence. "Mom?" came Peter's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Megan's stomach dropped. Her hands instinctively gripped the blanket tighter. "What do you want?" she called out cautiously. I'm sorry," Peter mumbled from the other side of the door. I didn't mean for it to happen like that." Megan's jaw clenched, her pulse racing again. "Go to bed, Peter," she replied, her voice taut with restraint. "I need time to think." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, almost too quiet to hear, Peter whispered, "Please, just let me in for a minute. I need to talk." Something in his tone, desperation, maybe even fear, gave her pause. Megan hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to stay firm. But against her better judgment, she let out a sigh and unlocked the door. It creaked open slowly. Peter stepped inside, his shoulders stiff, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. And in that moment, the air in the room seemed to shift again. Peter's voice wavered, barely audible. I didn't mean for things to get weird. I'm sorry." Megan's frown deepened, her tone sharp and unyielding. Weird. That's what you call this? Just weird? Peter let out a shaky sigh, running a hand through his hair. I wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable, okay? I wasn't thinking. Megan stepped closer, her voice cold, piercing. What asterisk or asterisk you thinking, Peter? You came into my room in the middle of the night, and her words hung heavy in the air. I wasn't looking on purpose. Peter blurted out, his face flushed with panic. It just happened. Megan crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Asterisk, it just happened, asterisk. You saw me, Peter. You saw me half-dressed, and you think it's no big deal. Peter's gaze finally lifted to hers, and for the first time, Megan saw something beyond guilt in his expression. It was darker. Something she couldn't name flickered across his face, sending a chill through her. I didn't mean to. Peter stammered, his voice quieter now. But it's hard to forget. Megan's breath caught. Her voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and tense. What did you just say? Peter hesitated, his jaw tightening. Then, almost too softly, he murmured, It's hard to forget what I saw. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Megan's pulse raced, her instinct screaming that something was very wrong. You need to leave, she said at last, her voice sharp and commanding. Go back to your room. We'll forget this ever happened. Peter's gaze fell again, his shoulders slumping. I can't, he muttered. Megan's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I can't stop thinking about it, Peter admitted, almost to himself. About you. Megan's heart pounded, anger and fear warring inside her. Stop it, she snapped, her voice rising. Just stop. She turned away, pacing toward the window, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. The suffocating weight of vulnerability pressed down on her. This isn't right, she said, more to herself than to him. None of this should have happened. Peter's footsteps were soft, but deliberate, as he moved closer. I don't know why it feels like this, he admitted quietly. But it does, and it's not something I can just forget. Megan spun around, her eyes flashing with frustration, fear, and confusion. You're my nephew, Peter, she shouted. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. This isn't something we can just brush aside, Megan said, her voice trembling but resolute. Peter's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as he muttered, It didn't start like this. It wasn't supposed to happen. Megan's heart pounded like a drum, the situation spiraling further into territory she didn't understand, territory she couldn't control. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of fear. Peter stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers, intense and unrelenting. I don't know, he admitted, his voice low and raw. I feel something, Megan, and it won't go away. Her breathing quickened, her instincts screaming to get out of this moment, to escape the danger that was no longer subtle. You need help, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. You need to talk to someone. I don't need help. Peter snapped, cutting her off, his voice rising as his frustration spilled out. I just need you to understand. I need you to see it for what it is. What it is? Megan's voice was sharp, incredulous. Her body tensed as she stepped back, her words heavy with both disbelief and anger. You're my nephew. This is twisted. You don't get to decide this. It's wrong. Peter's face contorted, his emotions flashing across his features like lightning. It feels real to me, he said, his voice softer now, but no less firm. I didn't ask for this, Megan. I didn't ask to feel this way. But I do. Her hands trembled at her sides, her anger barely masking the panic building inside her. You need to stop this. Right now. This isn't a game, Peter. His eyes locked onto hers with a gaze that made her stomach churn. There was something in them, something primal, something dangerous. I can't, he whispered, his tone hauntingly quiet. Megan's chest tightened as she instinctively backed up, bumping into the edge of her bed. She felt trapped, cornered, not just physically, but emotionally. You don't have a choice, she said, her voice shaky but defiant. You asterisk can asterisk stop this. Peter took another step forward, his presence oppressive, his words calm yet unnervingly resolute. I'm sorry, but I don't know if I can. Her pulse raced, every nerve in her body on edge. Get out, she whispered, the words barely audible, laced with a mix of desperation and fury. Get out before I. But before she could finish, Peter's voice cut through the tension like a knife. We're connected now. There's no going back. The room seemed to spin. Megan's breathing turned ragged, panic bubbling beneath the surface. She had to end this, to stop whatever was happening from going any further. You're my nephew, she snapped, shaking her head, her voice filled with disbelief and rising anger. You can't mean what you're saying. Peter's gaze softened, but the intensity didn't fade. I do, he said quietly, his words steady and chilling. And I don't know what to do with it anymore. The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating her, pressing down on her chest like an unbearable burden. Megan sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her thoughts racing as fear and confusion clouded her mind. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, her best friend Sarah's name lighting up. Asterisk Sarah. Hey, hope you're doing okay. We need to talk soon. Call me when you can asterisk. Megan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't bring herself to type a response. Her mind was a storm of memories and emotions, all centered on Peter, his eyes, his words, his touch. How had things spiraled so far out of control? The scene replayed in her mind, over and over, every detail sharpening with each pass. The way he looked at her, the tremor in his hand, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fleeting moment. It was real. And worse, it couldn't be undone. Her thoughts churned, and with each passing second, a chilling realization settled in her chest. This wasn't just a random lapse in judgment. Peter had been watching her, studying her, for longer than she'd ever noticed. This wasn't something she could dismiss. It wasn't fleeting. It was something darker, something dangerous. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Her breath hitched as she turned to see Peter standing in the doorway again. His expression was hard to read, but there was a calculated sharpness in his gaze, something that made her stomach twist. I shouldn't have come in here, Peter muttered, breaking the tense silence. Megan's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Her voice was sharp, cutting. No, you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have said what you did. You shouldn't have. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Peter interrupted, his voice rushed, almost pleading. I'm sorry. I can't control it. Megan's fists clenched tightly in her lap, her voice cold and firm. This isn't something you can't control, Peter. This is wrong asterisk. Peter's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. It didn't feel wrong at first. It felt right. You made me feel something I've never felt before. Megan recoiled as a wave of disgust rolled over her. Her voice cracked with a mixture of fury and disbelief. That's not an excuse. You're my family. My nephew asterisk. I know what it looks like, Peter said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can't help how I feel. I've never felt this way about anyone before. Her breathing grew faster, her chest rising and falling as fear and rage battled for dominance. We can't do this, she said, her voice trembling but resolute. We can't keep pretending like this isn't happening. Peter stepped closer, his gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. But we can't pretend it isn't there either. Megan shot to her feet, her eyes blazing. We have to pretend. You need to walk away from this, Peter. Forget what you think you feel. This ends now. Peter's lips twitched into a faint, bitter smile, the tension in the room so thick it felt like it would swallow them both whole. Peter's faint smile sent a chill down Megan's spine. It's not that easy, he said quietly, his voice low and resolute. Her heart pounded harder. It has to be that easy. I won't let this destroy everything. I want asterisk. Peter's expression darkened, his tone dropping even further. You can't stop it. Not now. Megan's fists clenched at her sides, her voice shaking with anger. I'm your aunt. I raised you. How could you? How could you let this happen? His eyes glimmered with something she hadn't seen before. Something unsettling, almost dangerous. It wasn't just me, Peter said, his voice calm but cutting. It was you too. The words hit her like a sledgehammer. Megan staggered back, her whole body trembling as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Peter murmured, but the damage was already done. The silence between them was suffocating. Every breath felt heavy, every second drawn out. Megan began pacing, her mind racing to piece together the chaos unraveling around her. Her heart thundered in her chest as the realization sank in. How had this spiraled so far out of control? How had she let him get this close? Peter stood motionless, his gaze fixed on her. He watched her with a quiet intensity, his expression unreadable, but Megan could see the conflict behind his eyes. He knew deep down that this was wrong, something that could never be undone. Finally, she stopped. Her movements sharp, she spun to face him, her voice cold and unyielding. You can't keep doing this, Peter. You can't. Peter's jaw tightened, but his gaze didn't waver. It's not something I can just turn off, Megan. Her eyes narrowed, fury and heartbreak etched into every word. This isn't something you should feel. It's not right. It's grown. I know, Peter whispered, his voice barely audible, but it didn't soften the blow. But knowing doesn't change how I feel. Tears pricked the corners of Megan's eyes as her chest tightened. She fought to steady her voice, but it wavered. This isn't something that should even exist. You're my family. I raised you. How could you let yourself feel this way? Peter's expression hardened, his lips pressing into a thin, grim line. I didn't plan for it to happen, he said softly, his voice tinged with frustration. But it did, and now, I can't ignore it. You don't have to keep feeling this way. Megan's voice rose, her words a mix of desperation and anger. You need to walk away from this, Peter, before it destroys both of us. Peter took a step closer, his eyes fixed on hers. I can't just walk away. Not from you. The room seemed to spin as Megan staggered back, her mind reeling at his words. You have too. You must. I won't let you ruin everything, our family, our lives. This isn't just about feelings anymore, Peter. This is dangerous. For a moment, Peter's eyes softened, vulnerability flickering across his face. It made Megan pause, just briefly. I know you're scared, he said quietly. I get that. I didn't mean for this to happen, but now that it's out there, we can't just pretend it didn't. No, Megan shot back, shaking her head firmly. We have to pretend. There's no other way. Peter's gaze hardened, the softness in his expression replaced by something darker. It's too late, he said, his voice low. I can't pretend it didn't happen. Every time I see you, every time we're alone, I feel it. I feel something between us, and it's not going away. Megan's body went rigid as a cold wave of fear washed over her. You're my nephew, Peter, she said, her voice trembling. This has to stop. Peter's tone turned quiet, almost a whisper, but it was laced with a dangerous resolve. It can't stop now. I've already crossed a line I can't erase. The weight of his words hit Megan like a tidal wave, each one heavier than the last. Her breathing quickened, her mind racing for a way out, for something, anything, to end this. But there was no escape. Deep down, she knew Peter wouldn't stop. He couldn't. The days that followed were unbearable, the air between them thick with unspoken tension, like a suffocating fog. Megan and Peter went through their routines as if on autopilot, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when absolutely necessary. But no matter how hard they tried to push it aside, the tension refused to fade. Every glance, every shared moment, seemed to pull them closer to an inevitable breaking point. One evening, as Megan sat alone in the living room scrolling aimlessly through her phone, she felt him before she saw him. Peter's presence lingered in the doorway, his footsteps slow and deliberate. She didn't look up, but her body tensed, every nerve on edge. Finally, Peter broke the silence, his voice soft but strained. "We need to talk." Megan sighed, setting her phone down on the coffee table. Crossing her arms, she turned to face him, her gaze steady but tired. "We've already talked enough, Peter." "No," he insisted, stepping closer. "We haven't. Not really. Not about what matters." Her heart pounded in her chest, the familiar feeling of a trap closing in around her. "What is there left to say, Peter? This shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't even be possible." Peter stopped just in front of her, his expression calm, but intense. "It doesn't matter what asterisk should asterisk or asterisk shouldn't asterisk be," he said. "What matters is that it asterisk is asterisk, and we can't ignore it anymore." Megan's jaw tightened, her fingers twitching at her sides. "But we asterisk can asterisk ignore it," she said firmly. "We asterisk have asterisk too. It's the only way to protect what we have, our family, our peace." Peter's eyes softened, his voice cracking slightly. "But it feels real," he whispered. "It asterisk is asterisk real." "No," Megan said, shaking her head, her voice wavering. "It asterisk can't asterisk be. We're not supposed to feel this. It's not meant to be." Peter's tone dropped to a whisper, his words heavy with quiet defiance. "Sometimes things don't follow the rules. Sometimes they break them. Maybe, just maybe, what we feel was never meant to be ignored," Peter said, his voice low, his words heavy with meaning. The silence that followed felt endless. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, unable to look away. The weight of his words pressed down on her, unrelenting. "Peter," she murmured, her voice trembling. "We can't." But Peter reached out, his hand brushing against hers. His touch was soft yet firm, full of unspoken promises. "We already have," he said, his tone steady. Megan's breath hitched. Her body trembled at the spark that ignited between them, the forbidden pull she had tried so hard to deny. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel it, to acknowledge the undeniable connection between them. But reality hit her like a slap of cold water. She yanked her hand away, stepping back as though his touch burned her. "This isn't just about us anymore," she said quickly, her voice edged with panic. "It's bigger than that. If someone finds out, if they asterisk no asterisk, I'll do whatever it takes to keep it from coming out." Peter interrupted, his voice low but resolute. "I won't let anyone tear us apart." Megan's heart raced painfully in her chest, torn between fear and longing. "You don't understand, Peter. We asterisk can't asterisk control this. It's already spiraling, and no matter what we do, we're on a collision course. I don't know if we can stop it." Peter stepped closer, his voice softening, his expression almost pleading. Maybe we're meant to face it together." Tears welled in Megan's eyes as she shook her head, her resolve cracking under the weight of his words. "It doesn't matter what we're meant to do, Peter. What matters is what's asterisk right, asterisk, and this isn't right. We can make it right," he argued, his voice desperate now. "We can find a way." "No," Megan snapped, her voice shaking but resolute. "We can't. And we asterisk want asterisk. I won't let us go down this path." Peter's shoulders slumped, a flicker of defeat crossing his face. He hesitated before speaking again, his voice quiet, almost broken. "Then what happens now? If we ignore it, if we try to move on, what happens to us?" Megan closed her eyes and took a deep, shaky breath, forcing herself to push her emotions aside. When she opened them, her gaze was cold, steady. "We move forward. We pretend it never happened. We pretend asterisk none of this asterisk." Her voice cracked. "None of asterisk you asterisk ever happened." Peter's gaze dropped to the floor, his jaw clenching tightly. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "No," Megan said softly, her voice breaking. "It never was." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door, her steps slow but deliberate. She didn't look back. Peter stayed frozen in place, his expression unreadable, the connection between them severed, at least for now. But Megan knew deep down this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The start of a silent war they would both have to fight every single day. A war against themselves, against what they felt, and against what they knew they could never have. What do you think happens next? Will Peter walk away, or will he fight for what he feels, no matter the cost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.